Today I want to look into the Max Payne series. I want to talk about the dark noir atmosphere with a gripping narrative that delves into the mind of the most depressed protagonist I ever controlled. A New York City cop who was framed for a crime he didn't commit and lost everything, except his will for revenge. I want to talk about the slow but deadly bullet time that was revolutionary for 2001 and still feels fun to play around with. And of course I want to talk about the iconic phase that changed gaming forever.
From the trigger. And then it was over.
But before jumping into Max's story, I think it's worth looking at how this game even came to life. Developed by Remedy Entertainment, a small studio at the time that you might now know from games like Control, Quantum Break, and the amazing Alan Wake series. Max Payne was the game that truly put them on the map. Coming off of their first game, Death Rally, Remedy wanted to make something completely different. A dark and depressing third-person shooter with combat inspired by Hong Kong action movies and a story inspired by classic detective novels. Considering Remedy had a limited budget at the time, most of the story is told through these brilliant comic panels that give the game its iconic look. And of course, I can't forget the actors. To save more money for development, they had to get creative. They used Remedy employees, family, and friends as face models for many of the characters in the game. The most iconic one is obviously Max himself, using the face of lead writer Sam Lake, combined with the unforgettable voice performance of the amazing James McAfee.
After Y2K, the end of the world had become a cliche. But who was I to talk? A brooding underdog avenger alone against an empire of evil, out to right a grave injustice. Everything was subjective. There were only personal apocalypses. Nothing is a cliche when it's happening to you.
Even with the limited budget, Remedy managed to create one of the best and most iconic third-person shooters that still feels unique 25 years later. Max is a New York City detective, living a normal life with his wife and newborn daughter. From his first appearance, you can immediately tell that his family means everything to him, which is why the following events hit so hard. After what seems like a normal day at work, Max comes home expecting to see his family, but instead he finds the house completely trashed. Something is wrong. A strange symbol is sprayed on the wall, showing a syringe with the letter V, and seeing the state of the house, we don't need to be a detective like Max here to realize that this has been a break-in. Then the phone rings. A mysterious voice on the other side seems to already know what's happening, and when Max tells them that someone broke into his house, they simply respond with,
"Good. I'm afraid I cannot help you."
But Max doesn't have time to understand what's going on. He needs to find his family, but by the time Max reaches them, he's already too late.
No, please God, no.
The flesh of fallen angels!
No, God, no, please, Michelle. Oh, baby.
The story picks up 3 years later. Max is now a DEA agent, working undercover to find the source of the drug known as Valkyr, the same drug that the people who killed his family were using, and the same symbol that was sprayed on the wall of his house that night. His sources lead him to Jack Lupino, a mob boss in the Punchinello family that is trafficking Valkyr. Max goes undercover to infiltrate the worst mafia family in New York. He gets a phone call from Bibi, who is one of his only contacts from the DEA. He tells him something urgent happened and he needs to meet up with Alex, who is another DEA contact. This leads us to the Roscoe Street station.
The station was drenched in gloom. Alex was a ghost, nowhere to be seen. I'd have to look for him.
Walking through the station, we find blood covering the floor, bullet holes in the walls, and a dead police officer lying on the floor.
Death was in the air at Roscoe Street. I'd have to find Alex fast.
Leaving this room, we are introduced to the game's combat system. On the surface, it's pretty simple: point, shoot, and try not to get yourself killed. But this is where we finally get introduced to the mechanic that made Max Payne, well, Max Payne, bullet time. The reason why bullet time feels so good to use is because every room becomes a small action scene where you open doors, dive into a room full of enemies, and try to take everyone out before they even know what happened. After fighting our way through Roscoe Street Station, Max finally finds Alex. The meeting doesn't last long though. Before Alex can explain what's really going on, he's assassinated by one of Lupino's men.
It's... Alex?
Lupino frames Max for the murder and the NYPD falls for the bait. So now Max is wanted by the cops and by the mafia. His search leads him deeper into the Punchinello crime family and eventually face to face with Jack Lupino. This is where the game shows its darker side. This isn't just a depressing third-person shooter, it's also a disturbing one. Searching for Jack, we find his lair. There's a pentagram on the floor with some of his human sacrifices laying lifeless. Exploring the room, we find more info about what's going on.
The table was scattered with notes of demented arcane nonsense written in rusty blood. A mishmash list of demons, devils, and dark gods evoked.
Beelzebub, Asmodeus, Baphomet, Lucifer, Loki, Cthulhu, Lilith, Hela! Blood given to you all.
He was after that old Faustian deal. Your soul for power and fortune. Just sign on the dotted line with your blood.
This is what Valkyrie does to people. It destroys their minds, and Jack here is the perfect example of that. By the time we finally find him, he's completely lost his mind. He believes he's connected to something greater, talking about demons, angels, and things that aren't even there.
I have tasted the flesh of fallen angels. I've tasted the devil's green blood. It runs in my veins. I've seen beyond the world of skin, the architecture of blood and bow and arrow. Death is coming! She is coming, and hell follows with her. This is the twilight winter. I am ready to be her son. Her time is now, and all who stand in her way must die!
After dealing with Lupino, Max meets Mona Sachs, a mysterious assassin who seems to know more about what's going on than she's willing to admit. She tells us we got the wrong guy. Lupino wasn't the person behind everything, he was just another piece of the puzzle. The person Max really needs to find is Angelo Punchinello, the head of the Punchinello crime family and the man controlling the Valkyrie operation. But before Max can get any more answers, Mona spikes his drink, leaving him unconscious. And this is where we get one of the strangest and most memorable parts of the game, Max's nightmare. Inside Max's nightmare, we're forced to relive the worst moment of his life, the night his family was murdered. I remember playing this part of the game as a kid. I was about 8 or 9, and every time I would reach this part, I would turn it off and start a new game. It's terrified me, and now that I'm older, it still kinda does. The crying baby, the endless hallways, and Max blaming himself shows us that even after the 3 years, he still hasn't escaped that night. There's 2 nightmare sections in the game, and in my opinion, I don't really think we needed 2. It sets the tone of Max's fragile mind very well, but it's such a drag to play through on subsequent playthroughs, especially the hallway part. Now, I understand what Remedy was going for here. They wanted us to feel lost and uncomfortable, just like Max does. And the first time you experience it, it definitely works. But when replaying the game and you already understand Max's trauma, slowly walking across invisible paths while hearing a baby cry isn't exactly the part you're excited to experience. Thankfully, these sections are short, and once you get through them, the game quickly throws you back into action. After escaping the nightmare, Max wakes up in the hands of Frankie, one of Punchinello's men. And this is where the game reminds you that even though Max Payne is dark and depressing, it's also really weird. Instead of just killing Max, Frankie decides to leave him tied up while he goes back to watching cartoons. It's a small moment, but scenes like this give Max Payne so much personality. One minute the game is showing you Max's trauma, and the next you're fighting a guy obsessed with baseball bats and cartoons.
Take me, for example. I love to watch cartoons. Cartoon violence is a fascinating thing.
Max breaks free and continues on. He finally finds Frankie, and while I love the build-up to his character, I really wish the boss fight itself was better. This is where one of my biggest problems with Max Payne's combat starts to show. Most enemies go down pretty quickly, which makes bullet time feel fast, deadly, and satisfying, but boss fights mostly just turn regular enemies into bullet sponges. Frankie basically just eats an entire gun store worth of bullets before finally going down. It took me 10 retries to beat him. After finally reaching Punchinello, Max realized he was never truly the person in control.
Punchinello was a pushover. The moment I stepped into the room, he folded like a deuce before a royal flush.
No, wait. I was just doing what I was told. I couldn't refuse. She's someone high up. Government, maybe. I don't know.
He was trying to buy more sand for his hourglass. I wasn't selling any.
3 guys in suits break down the door and take care of him. After that, we find the real mastermind behind Valkyr.
Don't move.
Game over, Max Payne.
The real mastermind is Nicole Horn, the head of Acer Corporation. She drugs Max with Valkyr, and this is where we get the second nightmare section of the game. There's this cool fourth wall break where Max finds out he's in a graphic novel, and another one where he finds out he's in a video game.
Cracked through my brain, weapon statistics hanging in the air, glimpsed out of the corner of my eye, endless repetition of the act of shooting, time slowing down to show off my moves, the paranoid feel of someone controlling my every step. I was in a computer game. Funny as hell, it was the most horrible thing I could think of.
But besides that, the rest feels like a copy and paste of the first nightmare section. The long hallways, the baby crying, and following the blood trail all make a return. At the end of the nightmare, Max finds his dead wife again, but this time he has to face a nightmare version of himself to finally snap out of the effect of the drug. Right before Max snaps out of it, we can see a short distorted flashback of him talking with his wife. She mentioned something strange that happened at the office, a memo connected to Vikings. But Max cuts the conversation short and leaves. This strange memo about Vikings will make sense and become a lot more important a little bit later in the story. After surviving the effects of Valkyr, Max finally starts putting all the pieces together.
There was an old army bunker under the steel mill. I knew the military plaque on the floor. I had seen 1,000 variations of the insignia on crumbling brick walls everywhere in the city. The sword replaced by a syringe. Project Valhalla, V for Valkyr, V for Valhalla. All of a sudden it read like a crackpot conspiracy theory.
The strange memo about Vikings wasn't just a random detail. It was connected to Project Valhalla, a secret government experiment created to improve soldiers using the same drug Max has been chasing this entire time, Valkyr. The project was eventually shut down because of how dangerous it was, but Nicole Horn and Acer Corporation continue working on it behind the scenes. And this is where Max discovers the most painful truth. The death of his family wasn't just some random break-in. His wife found information she was never supposed to see, and because of that, Horn had her killed. With nothing left to lose, Max attacks Acer Corporation and goes after Nicole Horn. After fighting through Horn's security, Max finally reaches her as she tries to escape in a helicopter. But instead of a normal final boss fight, this game does something a little different. There's no massive bullet sponge enemy waiting at the end, just Max, a helicopter, and one final shot. Max destroys the tower, bringing down the helicopter, killing everyone inside. He finally got his revenge, but it changes nothing. His family is still gone, and now so is his freedom. But Max gives us one last smile. He finally stopped the people responsible, got his revenge, and found the closure he had been chasing for 3 years. And at this point, that's all that matters to him. Now, the story and atmosphere are obviously a huge part of Max Payne's identity, but none of it would actually matter if the game wasn't fun to play. I already talked a bit about the gameplay while going through the story, but there's still a lot more I want to talk about. First off, of course, is bullet time. The mechanic was revolutionary back in 2001 and it's still so damn flashy today. But bullet time isn't only used to jump and slow time, it also automatically reloads your weapon. So in the heat of the battle, let's say you're running out of ammo, it's a smart move to use bullet time to instantly reload instead of having to wait through an animation of max reloading. There are a lot of weapons you use throughout the story, but my personal favorite have to be the Ingrams. These dual Uzis have such an insane rate of fire that every time you activate bullet time and dive into a room, you're almost guaranteed to win the fight. The same goes for the Colt Commando. You get it a bit later in the game, and even though it has a slower rate of fire than the Ingrams, it makes up for it with more damage and accuracy. I also want to talk about the difficulty. Max is one man going against mobsters and government agents. Most fights leave you barely alive, and this is where painkillers come into play. They slowly heal a portion of your health, but it always feels like it's never enough. You will wait until you're back to full health, walk into the next room feeling confident, and then a random enemy hiding around the corner with a shotgun instantly kills you. And don't even get me started on enemy grenades. If you see one flying towards you, it's probably already too late. This is where you realize how important the quick save feature is. Every time you die, you're sent back to the beginning of the chapter, and since this is a game from 2001, you don't have the constant autosaves that most modern games have. So after a while, pressing F5 becomes part of the gameplay loop. Clear a room, quick save, open a door, quick save, because you never know if the next room is gonna have 5 enemies waiting for you with shotguns. And this brings me to the level design. You're constantly moving through tight hallways, apartments, subway stations, and abandoned buildings where enemies can be behind any corner. But what makes these locations memorable isn't just the shootout, it's the atmosphere. The levels themselves are not huge or complicated, but every location feels like it belongs in Max's depressing world. New York is covered in a snowstorm, the streets are empty, apartments are destroyed, and throughout the game you never see a person who doesn't want you dead, except maybe the Valkyrie junkies that won't attack you unless you attack them first. You walk into rooms with TVs still playing, criminals having conversations before they even know you're there, and small environmental details that make the world feel alive. You can mess around with things like water dispensers, vending machines, TVs, and other random objects that don't really affect gameplay but make these locations feel like actual places people lived in before everything went wrong. The entire game has this lonely and depressing feeling like the world moved on and Max is the only person still trapped in that one terrible night 3 years ago. And when you combine these locations with the comic book style storytelling and Max's narration, it creates an amazingly unique atmosphere. And this is probably the biggest reason Max Payne is still remembered after all these years. Yeah, the bullet time was revolutionary, the action was stylish, and diving around with 2 guns will always be fun. But what makes Max Payne special is everything around it. The writing, the music, the atmosphere, and the main character who is impossible not to feel sorry for. Underneath all the slow motion action and over the top shootouts is a story about a man who lost everything and is desperately trying to find a reason to keep going. But Max's story doesn't end here, because even after getting his revenge, the past is a funny way of coming back. And next time, we'll be looking at Max Payne 2, The Fall of Max Payne. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.